Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. We are now on the Cowboys once again, discussing them, but not their upcoming matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. We already kind of gave our picks on that and projections on that. This time, Emmitt Smith, the longtime legendary Cowboy, brought up the Week 2 loss to the New Orleans Saints and also previewing this upcoming game against the Ravens and also not holding back on his former team. I think this was as honest of a response that I could have seen in general out of former players talking about their teams. Not a lot of them speak like Emmitt Smith did in this last interview that he had on the Up and Adams show, and I thought it was worth bringing up because I think it highlights a lot of what I've been saying and just being brutally honest, I think. And it is something to bring up here to show you guys what he said in a couple of instances in this statement. He said, initially, on the Cowboys being a playoff team, he said, "I'm not sure. Last week was just a debacle. It was just a debacle, period. And we didn't then rise up like we should have. And maybe we don't have the talented of a football team, that talented of a football team, to rise up and do what people expect." And then he continued on in this next statement by saying, "We do have a few injuries here and there, but bottom line is next man up. And right now, I feel like some of our players, whether it be on the offensive side of the ball or even on the defensive front, we could be playing with some, what I would call back in the day, playing B and playing C guys." And that's what I've been trying to say, but I haven't been that harsh, I guess I could say, right? Also, he continued on to say that he felt that they just needed to throw more deep passes in the game against the Saints. And one of the things that I found also interesting was that he said that he wasn't concerned with their running game, but instead he was concerned with the team's commitment to continue to run the ball when it might not look as good. He feels like they give up on the running game too early and often. In other words, so it obviously doesn't help when you go down as quickly as you do to the Saints, but you're trying to catch up fast, so you kind of ignore it. But to stay on this statement that he said, right, mentioning that, I'll go back to the first statement, actually, the first part of that. He said, "The main part to me was, and we didn't then rise up like we should have, and maybe we don't have that talented of a football team to rise up and do what people expect." And, in other words, like I've been saying, they just don't have the personnel really to match up. And, styles make fights. That's what everybody says, right? That's when you get, going back a couple years, right, in the past with the Bills and the Chiefs, two great quarterbacks, two very explosive offenses. That game that we saw, it's going to be hard to ever see a game like that, right, when the Bills tie it up with very little time left, seconds left, and then Patrick and the Chiefs go down in even less time and kick a field goal, go into overtime and whatnot, and then we get an overtime game and the Chiefs end up winning, right? Those sort of styles are very comparable and make for an exciting game. But also, when you just don't have the extra weapons, the running game, like Emmitt Smith, references as well. The quarterback, is great. Dak is a good quarterback. He's proven it last year. Going up against Derek Carr, you'd think you'd have the advantage there or a favorable matchup, right? If you're going quarterback for quarterback, then you look at the receivers, and you're looking at Chris Olave, CeeDee Lamb, Rashid Shaheed, and then I guess Jalen Tolbert, Brandon Cooks, Ezekiel Elliott as your running back, and then you get an upgrade, not necessarily just as a player for player, but I think in this moment Alvin Kamara is in a better spot than Zeke. So when you have that level of, I think, sort of similarity, you got to look to other places, right, to try and find an advantage, and that's where I think the play calling, the scheming, and matching up with some of these teams, right? Because the Saints, the play calling from Clint Kubiak, I think, is a huge thing. Everyone's talking about it now. Clint's name doesn't escape that many people when they bring up the Saints. It's probably one of the first names they bring up, really, when they're mentioning what the success is behind this Saints team. So I think that's where you got to find some differences. If not the players, you're just going to have the scheme, the game planning, and just have an overall idea of who you are and what you want to do in that game. And I still think the Cowboys don't really know what that is. I feel like they want to run the ball sort of efficiently, but this is where I started thinking about what Emmitt Smith said and not being concerned about the overall running game, but being committed to still running the ball when you're down 2 scores or when you're down 10 points or something like that. I started thinking about the fact that if you're sort of questioning the commitment to continue to run the ball, to me, one of the first things I think of is it has to do almost with your belief in your running game, right? Do you feel good about who you have at the running back position? Do you feel confident in your running game to continue to do it relentlessly through most of the game? It's not whether a question of, Zeke, Rico Dowdle, they're professional football players, right? They can execute a running game very good, very average, the bare minimum, right? It's not like they're pedestrian or amateur level, right? They're good NFL players, right? But still, the commitment or the belief to execute it at a high level, it makes me believe that maybe the coaches, maybe Mike McCarthy, don't really believe in it or don't really believe in the players or the scheme that they're running overall to continue to run it, right? It's almost like they're trying to find an excuse to try and get away from it, right? To try and throw a little bit more. They don't really feel comfortable running their offense mainly through the running game. And going back to yesterday, when we brought up the entire discussion about cover 2 and the low scoring in the NFL right now, that's what all the good teams are doing now, right? They're basing everything on the stretch run concepts to the outside, getting defenses to over pursue. And then that way, if they do that, you have a massive cutback lane to your right or to your left, the opposite way of where you're running, or you find the edge because you beat all the defenders to that side, and then off of that, that's when the passing game opens. And like I said before, the personnel is one thing. I feel like the Cowboys don't match up well with some of the better teams, the elite teams in the NFL right now, but when you're trying to find the differences in trying to create an advantage somewhere, that's when the game planning, that's when things like that pop up. And that way you can sort of group it in with the personnel that the Cowboys, again, just don't match up in that area, right? Whether it be the game planning on defense to kind of combat the stretch running plays, the Clint Kubiak, the Kyle Shanahan sort of offenses, right? If you don't have the personnel to match up with that, right, the defensive linemen to stay in their gaps or the linebackers to be disciplined enough to not over pursue or just kind of stay patient and really read where the offensive line is going, then you get games like you do against the Saints, right? And that's where I'm starting to try and take this thing to what Emmitt Smith is trying to get at. And he also mentioned it also a little bit later on, alluding to the fact that they are playing the Ravens, obviously, this week. He said, we're going to have to get our pride back, but I think the Saints came in and took something from us, and now we're going to have to fight like hell to get it back. And, of course, now looking forward, right, you want to try to forget about the Saints game. The win or the loss is going to be important, right, regardless, because of the record and everything. But also, I think it's how that win or loss happens that is going to matter a lot more to the Cowboys, I think, just slightly over the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens aren't in a good spot either, right? Don't get me wrong. But the Cowboys, being the Cowboys, horrible loss, now on the verge of maybe being 1-2. I think how the win or the loss happens is going to play a huge role in what everybody's saying on Monday, right? Because you win in a close game, people don't really change too much. Their attitude towards this team is kind of just on a pause, if that makes sense, right? They're kind of okay with the fact that you won. They're happy that you won, but also their attitude around the team doesn't really change. It's just sort of extended or just put on, a short pause until next week to kind of prove it again. But if you get a blowout win, that's when you start to see some people change their opinions. Maybe they're thinking, all right, maybe this team's a little bit inconsistent, but they're at least capable of competing with these great offenses. But then on the other side, if you have a close loss, people are going to be upset, right, because of the record. And also, they might start to panic a little bit. Being 1-2, it's not the start anybody would have predicted for the Cowboys. So that's what would happen in a close loss. And then if you get blown out again, that's like the full panic, full panic button, smashing it down, breaking the glass. Everything is thrown out the window, right, for this Cowboys team. If you just get embarrassed again, at home again, how the result happens is going to be huge as well. And I said it also last week, or this week, I should say, earlier this week, where the biggest thing about this Cowboys team, I think, is that we're in a bad spot if we already know what kind of team this Cowboys team is going to be and how sort of they're going to finish already in December, right? We're months away from that. A bunch of teams are going to change over the course of that time, and it just feels like the Cowboys, because they ran it back essentially, right? We're watching the same exact movie with the same exact characters or the same exact actors playing the same exact characters. We know how this story ends, either with a playoff loss in the first round or, dare I say, maybe not even making the playoffs at all. If you start 1-2, that's where, Emmitt Smith starts questioning, are you even a playoff team anymore, because you brought back the same players, but you lost a lot of players as well. That to me is the worst part of this. So early on, you're already trying to prove that you're a playoff team, right? And that's for November, December a little bit, right? When you're kind of back against the wall, if you find yourself in that position, you're trying to prove yourself, trying to fight for a playoff spot. That's when really people start to evaluate you in that regard, right? But I feel like the Cowboys are in that situation already right now where they're trying to prove themselves to everybody already, and we've only played 2 games, right? They're trying to prove what this offseason, what their decisions that they made are, whether right or wrong, and I think a lot of people are starting to lean in the wrong category, right? But that's where it is right now, knowing where you've had tough losses already, but not having the ability to improve is a scary place, right? Knowing what this team is already, right? They can't play from behind. They have a relatively finesse level defense, and offensively, they don't really have a running game. They are over reliant on CeeDee Lamb, and where do you find options to sort of change that, right? You're not going to find a new offensive coordinator. You're not going to find another A or one B level receiver, right, to be that number 2, unless Brandon Cooks, turns it around completely and becomes like a top 20 receiver. It's hard to find alternate options to this team right now, and it is a scary situation just staying the same, right? Teams get worse, teams get better a lot of the times as the season goes on, but it's staying the same creates the most frustrating situation, and that's where Cowboys fans are right now. It's hard to say that they can get even more frustrated, but I think, definitely if they miss the playoffs, which Emmitt Smith is questioning, I think would really be something that I haven't really seen in a long time, and how that would react, what sort of consequences that would create. I would be interested in seeing that, but I think we're way too early to kind of predict that. That's like absolute worst case scenario for this team, right? Still only 3 weeks in, almost 3 weeks in. So we'll see. They have a chance against the Ravens. I will say that. The Ravens haven't really impressed me, but the running game is going to be huge, and how they respond will be massive. But on that question, on that topic of responding, Bryce Young responded to the media on being benched by the Carolina Panthers this week. He had a chance to talk for the first time about the decision, and he gave his thoughts, and I'll also go into whether or not this is the end of this relationship for the Panthers and Bryce Young. Should he ask for a trade? And can the Carolina Panthers go back to him at all this season? That is coming up in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for